The weather in March of 2024 in southwestern Germany had been very mixed so far. March the 7th was the first day of the month that promised sunshine. A resident of a small town called Hockenheim took the opportunity to go for a walk near a popular river. He walked along the bank and let the sun shine on his face. There was still a faint smell of rain and damp earth, but the air was pleasant. But as he walked on, the more the air shifted, and the smell of rain and earth mixed with the smell of something burned. To be more precise, burnt flesh. The walker looked around and noticed faint wisps of smoke rising near some bushes, maybe from a barbecue fire that some teenagers had started and failed to properly put out. He stepped closer and was startled. What was burning there was not a grill fire made of branches and moss. It was a human body. During the external examination at the scene, the forensic pathologist could only determine that the victim had a head injury and was possibly female. But apart from that, no statements about the victim could be made. The body was burned beyond recognition. Although a phone was found next to the body, it had also been burned and could not provide investigators with any clues for identification. During the autopsy, it was confirmed that the victim was indeed a woman between the ages of 20 and 35. She had died due to blunt force trauma to the head and had then been doused with an exhilarant and set on fire. To identify the victim, investigators reviewed all missing persons reports filed in recent months. Several could have matched the woman found by the Rhine embankment. Officers collected DNA samples from the missing persons and compared them with the victim's DNA. And they got a hit. The victim was 27-year-old Ukrainian Polina Shevchenko. She had most recently lived with her mother in a refugee shelter. Polina had fled Ukraine alone at the beginning of 2023 because of the war and had initially settled in Slovakia. There, she met a man by whom she became pregnant. Nothing is known about this man. However, the relationship apparently was not very serious as Polina traveled on to Germany alone before the birth of her daughter. Her mother followed her to Germany to support her during the birth and in caring for her newborn daughter. Polina had lived in Germany for only 4 months before she was murdered. Of all places, in the country where she sought protection. But that was not the only cause for concern. Polina Shevchenko had been reported missing by her younger sister, who still lived in Ukraine. But the sister had not only reported Polina missing, she had also reported their 51-year-old mother, Olena, missing. There was also no trace of the newborn baby. However, within a week, the investigating officers surprisingly announced the arrest of a German married couple suspected in the case. After questioning other residents of the refugee shelter, investigators learned that Polina and her mother had met with this German couple at a Chinese restaurant the day before Polina's body was found. Only Polina returned to the shelter after the dinner, but she seemed strangely out of it to the other residents. She spoke incoherently and could not walk straight. A short time later, she was picked up again by the German couple along with her newborn daughter. She never returned to the shelter afterward. Shortly before the arrest, police also received an anonymous tip, again concerning the same couple. The tipster informed police that the couple had recently come into possession of a newborn baby, even though the woman had not been pregnant. The couple was 44-year-old Olivia Schäfer and her husband Edward, 2 years younger. Olivia was a trained podiatrist, and Edward worked as a cook for the army. Both Olivia and Edward were already known to the police, though previously only for fraud-related offenses. Olivia had brought 2 sons into the marriage and had a 3rd son with Edward. Edward had a daughter from a previous relationship, but she lived with her mother and had little contact with him. When the two were arrested, a newborn baby girl was found safe and well in their home. As officers approached the baby and Olivia was handcuffed, she shouted that the baby was her own and that she had a birth certificate. However, a DNA comparison revealed that the newborn was Paulina's daughter. Both Olivia and Edward exercised their right to remain silent, but the couple's chat histories spoke volumes. With meticulous attention to detail, the two had planned Paulina's murder over a long period and had extensively discussed possible methods in their messages. Investigators also began to suspect that the couple was involved in the disappearance of Olena, Paulina's mother, and that Olena was no longer alive. Although Olivia and Edward continued to remain silent, the overwhelming evidence at least led them to roughly indicate the area where the mother's body could be found. For days, officers searched a large area around a fishing lake for the mother's remains. Then one day, a diver discovered her body in some undergrowth near the shore. She too had been struck multiple times on the head with a heavy object. But why did Paulina and her mother have to die? Investigators found the answer to that question in the couple's chat histories as well. Olivia and Edward's marriage was on the verge of collapse. Although she loved her 3 sons, Olivia desperately wanted a daughter. But in her mid-40s, the chances of becoming pregnant were not very good. They continued trying nonetheless. At one point, Olivia had even been pregnant with a girl, but she lost the baby in the spring of 2023. The miscarriage marked a turning point. Olivia wanted the daughter she had lost more than ever before. She could think of nothing else. Every thought revolved around this desire for a child. That such an obsession leads to this level of violence is extremely rare. An unfulfilled desire for a child is emotionally very distressing for many people, but usually remains within the bounds of healthy coping. In rare cases, however, it can develop into a strong fixation, where one's life and self-worth depend almost entirely on it. Those affected may experience frustration, a loss of control, and a sense of being treated unfairly. Over time, thinking can shift. The desire is perceived as a right that must be fulfilled at any costs. At the same time, moral boundaries may blur because the goal, having a child of one's own, overshadows everything else. If empathy toward others also diminishes, victims may be seen merely as a means to an end. To justify their actions, perpetrators often develop internal explanations that make their behavior seem legitimate. This combination of fixation, self-justification, and lack of empathy can, in extremely rare cases, lead people to commit serious crimes. The unfulfilled desire for a daughter increasingly strained the marriage. However, Olivia and Edward had not initially planned to kill a young mother in order to take her newborn. Since spring of 2023, they had first considered every legal option to have a girl. But every legal option also came with a significant risk of ending up with another boy. In Germany, for example, you cannot choose the sex of a child when adopting. Authorities decide which child is placed with which family. With sperm donation, the chance of having a girl is still only 50%. No matter what they tried, a daughter was not guaranteed. As frustration grew, their moral compass deteriorated. Olivia was willing to use any means necessary to have a daughter. Edward's desire was less intense, but he feared for his marriage, and so he did everything he could to save it. In late 2023, the word child abduction was mentioned for the first time. For weeks, Olivia and Edward scouted hospitals with maternity wards in Switzerland. They know the names of newborn girls and the parents' addresses. They also familiarized themselves with the hospital's security measures. There are corresponding chat messages about this as well. For example, this one from Edward to Olivia. I checked out the situation here at the women's clinic. Front desk unattended. Even if not, the receptionist is about 260 pounds. She ain't stopping me. One nurse and one doctor on the ward. The babies are 60 feet away from me. The emergency exit is right next to it. What exactly led Olivia and Edward to abandon the kidnapping plan and decide on murder instead is not documented. But by the end of 2023, Olivia focused on finding young, single mothers online who had recently given birth and whose disappearance would not immediately raise suspicion. On the messaging service Telegram, she eventually found a post by a young, pregnant Ukrainian woman looking for someone to help her navigate bureaucratic processes, both linguistically and organizationally. Olivia responded to the post. She did not speak Ukrainian herself, but thanks to Telegram's automatic translation, she didn't have to. And that's how she met Polina. Over the following weeks, a kind of friendship developed between them, but it was entirely fake on Olivia's part. Behind Polina's back, Olivia and Edward continued planning the murder of her and her mother, Olena. For example, one day, Olivia told Polina that she wanted to apply for a bank loan and would like to show up with Polina's newborn daughter. It would make a better impression. Holding a baby would make it easier to get approved. That's just how things worked in Germany. Polina didn't know any better and handed over her daughter for an afternoon. But instead of going to the bank, Olivia went to the registry office with the baby to apply for a birth certificate listing herself as the mother. She had already prepared for the fact that the office would require proof that the baby was indeed hers. A few days earlier, she had gone to Polina's gynecologist and obtained the birth notification for Polina's child, which included the mother's name, date and place of birth, and details about the baby. That's how Olivia learned what such a document looked like, and she forged one with her own name as the mother, allowing her to obtain the birth certificate from the registry office. The first important step had been completed. Now, Polina and Olena had to be eliminated. Olivia and Edward invited the two women to dinner on March the 6th, 2024. At the next opportunity, Edward poured sedatives into their drinks. Shortly afterward, Olena complained of feeling unwell, dizzy, and with a racing heart. Olivia and Edward offered to take Polina and her daughter home and then drive Olena to the hospital. They dropped Polina off at the shelter, where she appeared disoriented to the other residents. But instead of taking Olena to the hospital, they drove her to the small fishing lake. Olena was dazed and didn't fully understand where she was. Without warning, Edward struck her several times on the back of the head with a rubber mallet until she lay motionless on the ground. They lowered her body into the water. However, they did not immediately return to Polina. Olivia and Edward first went home to calm down. They had just killed someone. They needed a moment. Once they had composed themselves, they moved on to the main part of their plan. They picked up Polina and her daughter from the refugee shelter and told her that Olena had suffered a heart attack and was now in the hospital and that they would take Polina to her. Polina barely registered any of this. She was so heavily sedated. Olivia and Edward drove her to the bank of the Rhine embankment, where Edward killed her in the same way as her mother and then set her on fire. 2 lives were the price for their own perfect family happiness. In court, Olivia and Edward Schaefer pleaded guilty. Both were charged with double murder, including Olivia, even though she had not carried out the killings herself. However, despite her confession, she downplayed her role in the crime. She claimed she had only been driving and that she should have stopped her husband or shouted louder, "No, please don't." The court found this statement not credible. Anyone involved in planning a murder for that long knows exactly what they are doing. On February the 10th, 2025, Olivia and Edward Schaefer were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of early release. Their 3 sons lost their parents as well. One son was already an adult at the time of sentencing and had to fend for himself. The 2 younger sons were placed in the care of youth services. Polina's sister took in her niece and brought her back to Ukraine. Despite the war, everyone involved agreed that this was the right decision. The child should be with her family. The adoption was initiated very quickly with the help of police and German authorities. Many officers and investigators from Hockenheim were deeply moved by the case and helped wherever they could. The police even organized a small memorial service in Germany for Polina and Olena, which Polina's sister attended. Where Polina and Olena were buried and how the sister and the child are doing is not publicly known. But one day, the child will have to be told where her biological family is, and that her mother and grandmother had to die so that a stranger could have her perfect family. That was episode 10, The Right Gender.